Okay, there you go.
There we are.
All right, so the person, asked what was the card, and the person said it was the ace of spades. So immediately I knew that I messed up somehow with the fours.
Do you think?
But going back to what was discussed earlier, that the audience did not know you messed up. Well, at least at that point, they don't know what to expect, right? So I said, really, it was the ace of spades? They said, yes. I said, that is interesting. And I'm continue reading the insurance policy. I said, and this says, the audience card will not disappear from the deck. So I said, just 1 second, let me take a look. I look through the deck, I say, there's no ace of spades. Yeah. So in that juncture, I simply control the ace of spades to the top.
Mm-hmm.
I said, there's no ace of spades here, guys. Very interesting. The bottom card's not the ace of spades. I said, the top card's not the ace of spades because I used the double lift. It's the ace of clubs. I said, what else did the insurance policy say? And it says, ask for a favorite magic word from your volunteer. What is your favorite magic word? And then she said, abracadabra. I said, correct, abracadabra. And guess what? That ace of clubs now just turned into the ace of spades. So that's how I concluded that trick. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of when things go off script.
Yeah.
If you can salvage it.
That's also a really good point from outs, challenges, and precautions of always having that out in the back of your mind of what could go wrong. When I was doing the Baroque fairs with Matt, I did the double paper tear. And so I have all the audience, they're doing the tear and I'm doing the tear, and theirs doesn't come together and mine does, and then I go, but you gotta deal with these other pieces here, and here's how I deal with it. And as soon as I did that, I realized I still had the torn pieces. And Matt knew I had them. He was sitting there in the audience. And so I think what I did was, I went over to somebody and go, you need to blow on this, you need to blow on this. And as they did, I came out and I switched them for the other one.
Right.
So, I mean, I had no clue what to do, knowing that I had really just screwed up, except for going to a spectator and making them, like you did, making them do the magic, and then getting and then doing the switch.
Yeah.
But I never had, I think like you, Lamp, is that I had no clue that I screwed up until I screwed up.
I know, yeah. And then I also have a second example dealing with what you might call a heckler. In this case, is that guy really heckler? I don't know. But this is actually true too. About a month ago, I did the Chinese New Year celebration thing at Northern Quest Casino. So I set up an area in there. I was doing kind of walk around magic, and I was doing the ambitious card routine signed. And then there's a guy there that been standing there the whole time watching me doing a bunch of tricks. And so I was doing the ambitious card routine, so the card, let's just say ace of spades is signed. I said, look, it's signed, jump back to the top. And when I place it to the middle, when I snap my fingers, it continues to jump back to the top, something like that. At that point, I hear him. He wasn't shouting out loud, but he was telling the people next to him, they're not even his friends, those are just other audience. He said, it's a double lift. He said, it's the second card. So I can hear him. So clearly the guy knows a little bit about magic, because words like double lift is actually a technical word. And then it's not good that the fact that he's telling other people what I'm doing, So it just happened to be, at that time, there are sign cards on top. So, and of course, initially, I just happened to be at the juncture of the routine which I show the ace of spades signed into the middle, it's really on top. So in this case, the way to deal with the heckler is if you have a little bit of knowledge about sleight of hand, you can actually do something. I said, right now, guys, the card is not on top, I did double lift, or is it second from the top, as some of you might be thinking? like some of you. So that basically calling out the fact that it's not a double dip, it's not second from the top. It's not at the bottom either. But if I snap my fingers, the card jumps back to the top. So that's an example. I'm not sure whether I convinced him, but at least for the people that was next to him, hopefully they realize, oh, it's not on the top. Because I specifically made a point. I say it's not on the top, nor is it second from the top, as some of you might be thinking. You know, and so in a way, I'm not calling out the heckler, but I'm using some magic skills that you know and kind of prove that that's not the case. So if you can do that, that'd be great too.
Also at the Portland Magic Jam, and you heard this one from Whit Hayden. He was up on stage, and somebody said something, and he stopped and he said, "This isn't television. I can hear you." I mean that just not only to that person, but to the whole audience. That just sent that message, and I think that's. Exactly what he said was, "This isn't television, I can hear you," or "I can hear you, this isn't television." One of those configurations. And man, that person just shut up, and the rest of the audience, it was like, wow, that's a great line.
Yes.
I collected a bunch of these things, and I'll just pass them around so you can kind of look at them, of sort of like canned ad libs. This one's called Idle Thoughts. I've collected these. Some of these are from comedian Stephen Wright, the kind of deadpan comedian. I used to eat a lot of natural foods till I learned that most people die of natural causes. So some of these lines are really pretty good. They told me I was gullible, and I believed them. So if you, I have a couple of these memorized to where. If I have an audience kind of doing this, you can just kind of stop and go, you know, they told me I was gullible and I believed them. And that makes them start thinking of something different, just to throw one of these out there at any particular moment. The ones from Stephen Wright, I don't think these are, well, maybe these aren't copyrighted or something, but there's some pretty good ones in there. This one, I'm not sure where I collected these. Half the people you know are below average. I'd kill for a Nobel Peace Prize. So there's some of these in here. You get half the page, and here's the other half. And like I said, I've got some of these memorized to where I can use them to kind of diffuse things as they come along. Or if it's just some point in my show where I'm kind of just standing there, I don't want any dead time, so I'll throw something like one or two of these out there, just to give some people something to think about. I heard this one, I thought this was a great line. You can make a small fortune as a magician if you start out with a large one. I'm not quite sure where I found that at, but I'll probably some comedian.
Didn't John say that originally?
What's that?
I just figured you would be the one that made up that phrase.
Did you want to hear 50% of all doctors finish the bottom of their class?
Yeah.
Bottom half of their class?
Yeah.
There's a corollary to that. What do you call the doctor who finished the bottom of his class? Doctor.
So this is what I use. I use a little bit of these just sitting there, and actually sometimes if I'm up on a stage, I'll have a card with some of these on there, kind of sitting off to the side of my table that nobody can see, and that way if I'm sensing that there's going to be some dead time or something like that, I'll throw one of those out so the audience kind of gets a little giggle out of it or something like that. But I think the important thing with using one of these canned ad libs is that it just kind of sets the audience at ease a little bit. It gives them something else to think about rather than what you're doing up there, just for that second and a half or 2 seconds to give you time to refresh, to re-click, to kind of get back into what you're doing, especially if you're doing this trick that does not meld into the next trick. So you have that, okay, I just did this rope trick, now I'm gonna do this. That you can throw some of this stuff in there and it keeps that audience kind of on edge and on your side. What else do you all think about this sort of stuff and kind of putting it in, putting it out, or any other examples of what we can do or can't do to keep the audience and in line and kind of like a rodeo or something?
I was in a lecture down in Portland, and I want to say it was John Carney, but I don't know for sure. I won't guarantee it. But he had a line that I thought was real interesting. He says,
I'm going to steal it.
Something about how do you get good at stuff. He says, don't do anything unless you've got an out for everything.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You know, and a lot of tricks, it's hard to come up with an out for everybody. Just to rethink your routine. You know, what happens if it goes wrong now? You know, what do I do? You know.
Cameron?
I consider myself pretty good at that. However, at the contest was one situation where I could have used an out like Lamb had used, because in my situation, for some reason, it just never occurred to me that you could cut a Svengali deck to not a force card. Because I've tried, and that's the thing, is that I've tried, but I forget that my technique is perfect. So it's almost impossible when the cards are aligned properly, but if a spectator is using them, they can be disheveled. And I still don't know for sure, but I think that was what went wrong, is that the cards were disheveled enough that she could have cut to a long card. And in that scenario, I was so baffled, I think, by the fact that she hadn't cut to a force card, that I was like, and I was also caught up in the fact that there was going to be a prediction after the end of the trick. So not only was it an any card at any number, but there was a prediction involved that the situation was destined from the outset to occur that way. And I didn't really realize the fact that I could just not do the prediction and then do a top change of the card. I could have. However, at the same time, I had also built it up to the point where, like, this was the pinnacle, quite clearly the pinnacle of the trick. It was like, you dealt 43 cards onto the table. You know, to top change out at that point seemed a little bit...
When did you know in that routine that it was wrong, and that it had gone wrong?
As soon as I had said, I'm sorry if I'm getting a little worked up, but it's just because I don't know what's more incredible. The fact that your number, 43, happened to be the exact number where we find your card. And that's when she said, that's not my card. So I'm like, because the next line was, or the fact that I predicted it from the beginning. Right? And that was the end. So I was one sentence away here. And I'm like, and she's like, and I was like, and I looked at it because I thought, oh, I must have somehow counted to a long card, because that would be a much easier fix, you know? Because half the deck is outs. Right. But I look at it and it's the force card, so I'm like, so half of me is like, how did this happen? The other half is like, is there a way out? And then most of me was like, not really. Because, you know, at this point it's like, okay, I could top change, and then the whole canter of the routine is off. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I could have, you know, oh, well, that's very strange. Snap my fingers and it changes. It's like, either way, it's kind of an anticlimax. So, although it would still probably have been preferable to at least change it and try to have some sort of way out, I think I was just so taken by surprise at the fact that it happened, you know? Because like I was saying, it's like, there's always a contingency with the Svengali deck, because it's like, you know, if you get to the wrong card, you know, half the deck is the right card, so it's very easy to find it and change it out. But yeah, the moment when I realized that it was the force card and that it wasn't hers, I was like, it was too much. I couldn't handle it.
And that's sort of opposed to what I ran into, of knowing that I had the torn papers here, but I knew I had the full one in my pocket. Yeah. So I automatically had an out. I just had to play it up. But yeah, I mean, in that, I mean, you were just dead duck.
And I mean, and like I said, I should have just top changed out, because it would have been weak, but it would have been better than stepping off.
Because the audience didn't know what you were doing in the first place.
Yeah.
Right, and so it would have been weird because they'd be like, that was awfully circuitous, but at least it wouldn't come across as a total failure. But
Because the only thought I thought for an out really doesn't look good was, oh, you miscounted. Because I'm thinking,
right,
there's 52 decks 50 cards in the deck, and he picks, in the high 40s. You're like going, that's a lot of that. It's easy to make a mathematical mistake, but do you really want to point out that the person made a slip up of 1? Well, how do you know they made a slip up of 1? Well, then it's just like, that doesn't even work. So I couldn't figure out what to do either on that. He admitted it. I probably would have gone for it and looked like a fool, but he at least admitted it.
Well, maybe a card worker should carry a wallet with you, palm the card off, and find it in the wallet. I mean, there's an automatic out for anything with doing card work.
When they were counting, were they actually counting in the Svengali deck, or did you switch that out at that point?
there was a deck switch, but it was at the very beginning. I had them examine the deck and then switched it out.
Oh, okay. So the Svengali was still there, could be used, the thing, count 43 cards, okay, we've eliminated, here's the next card or something.
Well, it wasn't that issue.
Okay.
That wasn't the thing. It was that she had cut to a non-forced card when she selected the card at the beginning, right? Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying.
Well, you were trying to get any card at any number, right? Because the audience had named the number, something like that, you're going to count to it at some point.
Right.
Okay, and you came up with what, the wrong card then?
No, so what happened was I had her select the card by cutting the deck into several piles and the top one.
Right.
Well, whatever she looked at when she did that was not a forced card.
Right.
So it's a random card, truly random. God forbid the magician ends up in the situation he actually explained. And
you made a random choice. Yes, I did.
Like, oh God, you made a random choice. So yeah, so then she goes to count down the cards. She's counting. And she comes up to put the one card at the number that was selected. And it is a forced card, but of course this is not the one she looked at.
Ah, okay.
So it is a forced card, but it's not the card she chose. And so I was just like.
And then I think the situation is even a little bit more complicated because the fact that it is a Svengali deck.
Yeah, right.
It's not a regular deck.
Right.
So.
Well, it's not. I mean, it would be very easy to talk about. But at the same time, like the top change is one of those things as well that I really don't do on a stage. Like. Yeah. To do it close up is a little easier because their visual frame is about this big. On stage, you're never going to get them to really, I mean, okay, you can get them to look away from your hand, but at the same time, there's a reason that stage magicians turn to the side when they need to load something, into their hand because the visual frame is so large. And so I also wasn't necessarily confident thinking, because it did cross my mind for a brief second, like, oh, I could change it out, but then I was just like, just all the things added together, it just seemed like it would be very obviously a cop-out or whatever, so it just...
Line you can use, it won't help anything, but line you can use when she's supposed to select a random card and you realize it's the wrong one. Wow, that's way more random than I expected.
Exactly. I mean,
and I could have also
being way more random.
I like that. Boy, that's as random as it gets.
Being who I am, I feel like I probably would have gone, if I had done anything, I probably would have said, your card, and she said no, and I said, so you can see, having somebody choose a random number, choose a random card, shuffle the deck, and deal down to that number, you're never going to end up on the card. You see, this is absolutely impossible.
See, and I thought your whole setup to this was really, really well done with the production of the wine thing, the rows, and kind of sitting there. And it kind of surprised me that you went into a card routine then, rather than kind of flowing with what you were what I thought you were setting yourself up to do.
The rose in the vase was just something I've been working on forever, and I needed to make it happen. So I was like, and the reason that I started that way was just for something visual, to make them know I know what I'm doing. and then to balance the feng shui of the stage, because it was completely a mess.
Oh, I thought it was great. Okay, he's on it here, and then you went into this card thing, and it was kind of like, well, that's sort of a strange melding of what you were doing with the wine thing, and sitting there so comfortable on stage, just having a drink, and while this person was doing something, it just kind of fascinated me that you went to a card routine rather than have the spectator do something different with a silk or a rose or something else, but.
No, I mean, I feel like I guess it just didn't really occur to me, and at the same time, it was like the card routine. The reason I chose to do it, for one thing, is that it was an original sort of idea of mine to incorporate this prediction into any card, any number, the way that I do it. I had done it in 2 performances before, but I wanted to test it again. And so I chose to do it for that reason. And then the opening was just a visual thing, and the wine bottle thing was just another visual thing, basically to just carry the routine through, because it's a kind of a lengthy routine, the card piece that I was doing, because it involves selections and then dealing down and everything like that. So basically I wanted something to open quickly and it was impressive.
Yeah, and it was.
And then I wanted to practice, because I need to, have more opportunities to get that in front of an audience. And then the wine bottle thing was like, okay, I figure if I'm going to be sitting aside giving directions, I might as well have something to do, so I'm not just sitting there. So the wine bottle.
Yeah, because that's sort of that empty space type of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that's why I filled the dead time as best I could with those visual things. Because also, the vanishing bottle is one of those tricks where it's like, as a standalone, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. It's just too much. Like, to the audience, I feel like it comes across as like, wow, that's a lot of work for that one, little thing. And so I feel like just working it into the thing as just sort of an offside thing. Having the idea to teach it as a trick, I didn't really come up with until I was in the moment. I was just going to casually crumple it up and put it away. So I think that's the best way to present it. But it ended up giving me an opportunity to teach it as a trick and then crumple it up when I say, okay, well, you don't have to use the trick. Just thought it would be nice. So yeah, I see what you're saying though. It does seem like a contrast, but in some ways I think that the more that I've been doing magic, the more I feel like I don't want everything to be a progressive sequence, because I feel like what I've learned is that people really like the variety and don't pay too much attention to how everything relates to each other. They don't really have their artistic sense, so to speak, but at the same time, I don't think it matters. And we talked about this, I think, in the last workshop, where it's like, as long as you have a way to connect 2 things, even if it's not a logical connection between the material, as long as there's something in between and it's entertaining, that's all that really matters. Because David Copperfield, it's not like he does an entire act around one single stage set.
Right.
He hops from one thing to another, and they're quite unrelated, but he just moves smoothly through it, and that's why it doesn't matter.
Yeah, his stream of consciousness is much different than ours.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of Copperfield's routine too, it's always big, small, big, small, big, small.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
Paced that way.
Yeah, and I've done routines where everything is like a very connected sequence of ideas, and it's fine, but it's not, I don't know that it really makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, and I always try for that stream of consciousness type thing of trying to flow from one logically into another, even if it's a canned line or a scripted portion in there to get me through that transition. Is I try to get that transition somehow, so I'm not just going, here's a trick, okay, here's another trick, here's another trick, okay, watch this, here's my 4th trick. I just want to try to get that flow, and I think that, and I'm kind of sorry I missed the last workshop where you were talking about scripting, because I think that that's the importance of the script, is to kind of get that chain or continuum of consciousness through. But still, I'm sort of addicted to some of these rejoiners and also canned ad-libs, as I think that they're great for filling in that time. And if you run into a silent thing, or run into a portion of your act where you're getting a little bit of heckle or something like that, is that these are great to be able to just come off with, because the audience thinks they're off the cuff, and that makes you funny, because they have no idea that it might be Stephen Wright talking, or some other comedian.
The lesson I learned at a job when I was working at the National Park Service, and we were at a site, and we go from bringing the audience in, the tour group, talk about one room, and then we would take them and show them another room, because you're basically showing them the location that they're at. Before you're allowed to have a tour, the chief ranger comes through and he has you walk through and give you a full tour as if you're giving a group, so that way you can give you pointers or see what you're doing. I'm thinking this is great. because now there's a few things I'm kind of questioning on facts. So I will kind of throw it at him, because that way I can test with him to say, no, you don't say this, or yeah, that's perfectly fine. And what happens is we go in and we come into the first room, I start talking, he says, great, next. And so I start the other transition to the next room, and in the next room, okay, great, here I go. All right, next. I'm like, all we're doing is moving from one room to the next. He's not even listening to what I'm saying. We left the building, went up to his office, and he sat down, and he goes, you're probably wondering why I didn't listen to you. I'm thinking, yeah, because I didn't get a chance to do what I wanted to do. Ask those questions, get those questions. And he says, I know you studied, you know a lot of the information, you know probably more history about this stuff than I do, because you've been freshly into it. He goes, what I really care about is when you have your audience, your group, when you move them from one room to the next, that transition, how well you can transition and keep their attention while they're adjusting from one spot to another. And I've always taken that to the magic sets. You know, you can do a trick, you can do a trick, you can do a trick, but if you don't have those transitions,
Exactly.
you're really failing at taking them on a tour and an adventure of magic.
Yeah.
So that's my
I
biggest thing.
think that's an excellent point. That, getting back to that flow, trying to get it to flow and flow and flow, and so they aren't just seeing one trick.
And that's where people get caught with, how do I get a theme of everything? They try to tie everything together because they're using that theme as a transition, rather than using the tricks and then making a transition to another trick. As you mentioned, Copperfield went from one part of the stage to the next. It was those transitions that helps. And magic really works best when you're telling a story and magic happens, rather than you're doing magic and a story happens. The audience really takes it differently.
So we're looking for the unified field theory of magic.
Electromagnetic.
Yeah, right. On the CBC, they have this thing called podcast playlist. And we get the CBC up there because we don't get anything else. And they had this lady on there, and I can't remember her name. I probably should have got it and put it on here. But she was doing this podcast on how to interview somebody. And she came up with 10 things. And I thought that these really, most of them applied to what we do as magicians. The first one was don't multitask, be present. Don't try to do too much at once, but just be sort of in the moment. Don't pontificate. Have something to learn from your audience or whatever. Used open-ended questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And again, like I said, some of this does apply, some of it doesn't. Number 4 was go with the flow. Go with the flow with what your audience is doing, what you're doing as a performer, and things like that. If you don't know, don't say you do know. You know, are you an expert? Well, don't equate your experience with theirs. And that kind of gets me back to someone such as someone just had a surgery or something like that, and you had your appendix out. Well, boy, I had my lung removed. Don't let them tell their story. Is the thing with that. Try not to repeat yourself or rephrasing. Stay away from tautologies. Stay out of the weeds. Forget the details. Just stay out of the weeds. Listen. If your mouth is opening, you're not learning. If your mouth is open, you're not learning. And number 10 was be brief. And I think some of those do apply to what we do on stage or close up or whatever, is that if we kind of take those under advisement, to be brief, be concise, make sure we know our material real well, make sure we know what we're doing, make sure we're sticking to the script as best we can. So that's basically my closing comments here. I'd like to hear from the rest of you of what you all think about the subject. Cameron? You got 30 seconds, by the way.
I think scripting is the center to all of it, and it's hard to really overstate the value of a script, just because when you script in ad-libs for situations that you anticipate and you have them there. I know a lot of people say things like, Well, scripted lines are bad because they sound scripted, and it's like, well, that's delivery. That's not a matter of the script. That's delivery. So I think it all comes under the same umbrella of just having a word by word script is really, really valuable if you can make it work for you. And so it's something I think we should all strive toward.
I was thinking the other day, it's really important to have a fully scripted stage show, I think. Because I mean, stuff typically proceeds A to B to C to whatever. But I was wondering what you thought of, like, on close-up or an intimate performance, of having sections that have to be scripted because it carries along the storyline of the trick or whatever you're doing, but allow space for ad libs or audience reaction or whatever, and then get back to your plot script on the thing. I typically tend not to script close-up stuff, but that may be a different way around it, you know.
So at the last close-up competition I had that very, very scripted. Normally I wouldn't script the chop cup that much, but for the close-up competitions, I wrote it down exactly how I wanted it to flow.
Comments on Ron's thing. I have more enjoyment on stage, so I don't do a lot of close-up, but when I think about close-up, it's a little bit more intimate than we mentioned, and if you talk the whole time, the intimacy is kind of broken. I mean, it's kind of like a little pot of water. It starts to boil, so you need to have little moments of areas that they can kind of release and say something, so that way you have your trick scripted, but you have moments where they can be a conversation back and forth a little bit, and having those little briefs of moments where one person can say something can help them listen to when you get to your next. And then the other part, I'm going to be kind of a hypocrite on my own self on this. We said, the last one in the interview is be brief. And to script, it's important because whenever you do your presentation, your motions, your misdirection, you want that to be calculated. You don't want to do stuff you don't need. We've all talked about be specific of what you do and why you do it. And scripting is the same thing. You're going to say a certain thing a certain way to get that motion going. And if you're not scripted, you start floundering around. I'm a great example because there's times I just go and it's you talk too much, and I agree, but I believe in that concept even though I'm not practicing as much as I should.
When we saw Pop Hayden down in Portland, he did his basic stage stuff. And if you went back to 2012 or 2010, it's the exact same lines, except for those little ad libs that he kind of throws in there to play to the audience a little bit better. Same lines. Steve?
Well, I think everybody else has said the same thing. You don't want to be a dealer doing demos, demo the props. I always try to avoid it. I'm probably not that great at it, but I don't want to be doing a dealer show. So you can find a way to trend it. And I thought I did a fair job of the close-up, whenever that was last time. I worked that for a long time to try to make the connection between the three different tricks I did. So that's all I have.
I like the line that Eugene Berger had in his lecture here. It says the thing that's most terrifying to magicians is saying nothing. It says that magicians, you just learn not to talk so much. Have a very short, precise statement or script element, whatever, and then let it sink in and move on to the next thing. They said, just stop talking.
He keeps telling me that all the time.
There's also the thing about a professional and amateur. What's the difference? An amateur does different tricks to the same audience. A professional does the same tricks to different audiences. So you are doing the same thing over and over. That's professional.
Paul Vigil, we saw down in Portland, stuff like that. He's a stickler for his script, and he's worked on it for years and years and years. And the thing where he was doing the chain, the line that you like, and the thing, he has a person
get that feeling in your head.
But he says, now look, watch you pick the right one, and his voice slows down and gets louder, and he says, and that's the last time you're gonna see that. And he was telling somebody that he'd worked on the exact
His
phrases.
voice level goes, and that's the last time you'll ever see that. And he,
They, on the walnut shells and peas, Hayden does something very similar, like, you know that feeling that you just won? You better keep that, because it's the last time
Hold
you're
on
gonna
to
feel
that.
that way.
Hey, can I just get a closing comment because
Okay,
of time?
Oh, okay, just a closing comment. I think scripting is important because if you have the script, it's harder to take you off script. But if you've got the script in your head and somebody says something and you deal with it, you always know right where to come back to. You're never at a loss thinking, oh, where was I? Where's the ball? So that's why I like scripting.
Okay, good.
so if you want some copies of this, if I can find them on my computer that blew up and everything else, I'll run off some more copies and bring them to the next meeting. Lamb, do you have any closing comments?
No?
I think this is an interesting discussion. I think that,
Yeah.
you know, maybe even at the next session, we might want to even take this even a
Continue,
little bit
yes,
farther.
definitely.
So, certainly gave me some nice ideas and things like that, so. Just go forth. Thank you, Lamb,
Thank you.
for inviting me and holding this session. It's been wonderful.
Thank you very much.